You're listening to the Talking Headways podcast network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Sophia Li.
Hey, Sophia. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here on the other side of the microphone for once.
I know. Well, for folks that don't know, Sophia is the mastermind behind the editing of the Talking Headways podcast. And also, you've been on the Monday show a number of times as kind of the person sitting on the couch taking notes slash with my mini microphone when other folks were on the show. And
occasional resident young person.
Yeah, exactly. Occasional answer of young person questions. But we haven't had you on the show for a while, and we kind of wanted to check in and see how you're doing and how everything was going with school and life and in general. How are things? How's everything going over on the East Coast, I guess I should say? I know you're here in San Francisco now, but you know, for school and such.
Yeah, no, things went really well this first year back from the pandemic. It was nice to get a chance to actually experience Cambridge for the first time and walk around. I'm in the process of getting my master's in landscape architecture at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. It's coming into my fourth year now, and I'm just having a great time learning and meeting people and getting to explore a whole new city.
So landscape architecture, tell me about this a little bit. It's not obvious. My master's was in urban planning and my undergrad was in geography. Tell me what some of the things are in landscape architecture that you kind of go through in terms of school and class and all that stuff.
So my undergraduate degree was actually in molecular and cell biology. So I think I entered the program a little more starry-eyed than some of my peers, but it actually was a program designed for people who didn't have a formal education, so to speak, in landscape architecture. And it was nice to get to learn alongside people who had backgrounds in art history or ecology. Landscape architecture, I guess the short way of saying it, is about the design of anything that isn't buildings. So streetscapes, public parks, gardens, national parks, all of this falls into the landscape architecture category. And a lot of big city projects have elements of landscape architecture in them, the planting patterns and even along the lines of hydrology or geology. And it's been a really interesting program. Having one whole year online has definitely been, I'm sure, a very different experience from what was originally planned. But I think for someone who going into graduate school was interested in both urban planning and landscape architecture, it's done a lot to kind of introduce me to a lot of new things and shape maybe things that I want to go into after graduate school.
Well, that's really cool. That's awesome that you have chosen something that you really enjoy and like. And I hope that you can find something that you want to do after you're finished with your studies, or just continue studying for a while if you want to do that too. You can always learn more.
Yeah, no, I remember you've said multiple times before about how it'd be nice to have a job where you could just or not even a job, just exist in a different city for a few weeks or months at a time and then go to a new city and explore it and really live on the ground. And if that were a career, that would be what I want to do. I very much empathize and sympathize with you on that.
Yeah, I know. I say this all the time, but I would love to just exist throughout the eons and live in every single city if I possibly could for just a little while around the world. Unfortunately, that's not possible, but it would be really super fun. And as an observer, not as an interlocutor, and not somebody who's gonna mess stuff up, just kind of as somebody in the background living their life. I think that would be super fun. Well, so tell me about Boston too. I mean, now that you've lived in both, you grew up in San Francisco and now you live in Boston. Tell me about kind of some of the differences you see between the cities.
Yeah, as a San Francisco native and then going to undergrad in Berkeley, I basically was in the Bay Area for my entire life up until moving to Cambridge. And I remember my first impression was just that it was really flat. compared to everything I had ever known. And it made it hard I didn't realize how much I depended on kind of these protruding landmarks in the Bay Area to navigate, like knowing where Sutro Tower was, and even having hills meant that I could see downhill to the ocean to understand where west was. And as someone with in not a very good innate sense of direction, I kind of didn't realize my first year in Cambridge, I wasn't used to not being able to know how to get where I wanted to go. And that kind of both the landmark issue as well as learning a whole new transit system after having Muni and BART and AC Transit my whole life. It definitely threw me for a loop. And it took me so long to get my first Charlie card, even though it only took 5 seconds. And once I got it, thankfully, I was like, oh, okay, I know what to do now. I can read a map, get on the train. I think it was just the barrier of entry once I moved to a new place was, I think, almost, I mean, not a unique problem to myself, but I felt like most people my age had experienced that before. And it took me a little bit of psyching myself up, like, okay, you don't know anything about the city and you're not going to know unless every weekend you pick a new direction, you walk until you're tired or your phone runs out of battery. Actually, I would keep walking if my phone ran out of battery. And then I'm like, okay, I got to find my way back. So I think this past year was a really nice opportunity to get to know Cambridge. Cambridge itself is a little bit sleepy in a way that I like. Reminded me of parts of Berkeley, pretty green. I was lucky to live near some pretty useful buses and train stations. And then I would sometimes take the train into Boston, go to Chinatown, get some pastries, and then sit in the park for a while. And that was like my little downtown adventure on the weekends.
Nice. It sounds like fun. It sounds like you've had a good time so far and will continue to have a good time. Well, so let me get some ads in here, and then we will start chatting about the show. So because we cover so many books, as I mentioned previously, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order your book from local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on and help us keep interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. Okay, this is episode 113. We're in session. Before we get to the show, I'd like to let folks know that you can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts when it's working. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. And thank you so much to the folks who subscribe through podcatchers. It's awesome that you guys keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. So back to the news. So the news is a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. In this instance, I haven't actually had a Monday show for, I think, a month or so because we've been busy. But this week, we're going to go and talk about a few articles that were kind of from the last several weeks rather than just the last 2 weeks. And we'll get to that going on now. Are you ready for the news?
I am, yes.
Awesome. I'm excited to chat with some of these with you because I have a feeling you're going to have some really good perspectives on them. First off, Bogota expands congestion pricing study, a pilot program in Bogota, Colombia that uses smartphone data to track movement in congested districts will wrap up soon. With the forthcoming expansion of the program, the city officials hope to create a congestion pricing plan. Meanwhile, U.S. cities are testing their own versions of the model. This was by Skip Descant in Government Technology. So first off, how this works is that in Bogota, they had 1,000 people who were given this app called Parsago on their phones, and they were asked to record all their trips with it. And also, to put it on their phone, people were offered prizes, quote unquote prizes, of up to 110,000 Colombian pesos. So people would download this app, and when they were driving around, they would log their trips, and they would register for potential prizes. I guess they had cash prizes for folks, and they probably had a lottery or something like that. But the cell phones specifically were just for this testing phase, as the company ClearRoad which is doing the tests, said they'll have some in-vehicle technology for this. So I imagine it's some sort of tracking like a GPS on your cell phone, but they were using cell phones for this test. So basically they're doing a cell phone-based or at least a GPS-based congestion pricing program. What were you thinking about this one, Sophia?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's perpetually wired to my cell phone, I think my first thought was that the idea of people getting comfortable being tracked, installing a device in their vehicles versus kind of opting in on an app on your phone, I feel like mentally people might have an easier time getting used to that since we unknowingly opt in slash don't opt out of various things anyways, and thinking about like people having to actively install a device versus, like you get like a toll bill in the mail. I just wonder if having this become integrated with the phone might actually be like I know they're only doing this for the pilot and they're considering doing permanent equipment for vehicles, but I wonder if kind of keeping it as I don't know how the privacy aspects, the details of that, but to me, it feels like it might go over better with people who are a little finicky.
Well, I guess it's a question of like whether you're okay with toll tags and cameras taking pictures of your license plate, or like just having them track you as with just having like a toll tags. Basically, you know how people have their fast track stuck to their window basically all the time.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing, except for you have a GPS transponder, I'd imagine. Because I tried to find out what exactly their like in vehicle technology was, and I don't think it was like the actual car had the technology inside of it already, because I think that they wouldn't want to have,
Right.
wouldn't want to depend on future technology cars to get this done. But I'm
Right.
guessing they would send people like some sort of a transponder, like a toll tag or something, and then it would track where they went. And then if they went into a zone, they would get, tolled, instead of having these elaborate camera systems or these elaborate, vehicle license plate camera systems, those types of things, or the toll tag system. So I think it's just an interesting way of thinking about doing GPS based pricing without having to do all that other stuff. Now they're going to have the software behind it, because I was thinking about like whether it was actually going to be a like higher cost or lower cost, and it seems like it might be a lower cost, because once you send people the transponder, you're just going to have to make sure it works all the time, I guess. But other than that, it seems like you're kind of plug and go, and you don't have to worry about cameras or anything like that. They just go through the satellites. But I'm just kind of wondering what the difference is maybe in prices between like the implementation of like a full congestion pricing cordon versus say like just giving people these transponders and having them kind of mark where they're going at any time. And as you said, the privacy thing is something that I think people may be okay with because it's just stuck to your car. Although there are a bunch of people that are really upset about even having their odometer read. So who knows what kind of, if we tried this in the United States, if this is something that people would actually go for from a privacy perspective.
Right. I wonder if I tried to download the app and see what it was like, but it was all in Spanish, and I unfortunately cannot read Spanish. But I wasn't sure, like, are they able to pay via the app, or are they also would they also be waiting for like a bill in the mail?
I would imagine.
I wonder if
So yeah, that's a good question. I didn't see anything about pay. Like, I think they were like piloting it, and you had like, it was not real money and all that stuff. So basically it was probably through the app that the transaction of, where you were was taking place. But I guess in real life, it would probably be an account-based system, like a lot of some of the transit passes are, where you have an account and you can use any number of different cards or whatever to get the payment done. So I'm guessing there's probably an account, and then the GPS, transponder thing is tied to your account in some form or fashion. So when you move into a part of the city, it probably charges it or something like that. But they didn't really go into too much of the details about that type of, that part of the system. It's just, this is kind of a new way of looking at cordon pricing or congestion pricing without all the other technology.
Is it both the app and a transponder? It's like you opt in on your phone for the transponder to work?
I would imagine you just have an account, and I don't know if you'd need a phone app anymore because the transponder would probably have the GPS in it. That's my guess. That's my best guess, because I don't think they mentioned it. I went to the Spanish speaking page too, and they didn't have as much, as many details, trying to figure out what exactly was going on. It would be interesting to see if they would actually allow people to, instead of having a transponder, if they would allow them to use their cell phones. But then, because people always, it feels like people are attached to their cell phones. And so leaving your cell phone at home, that like, in order to avoid a toll, you'd be like, well, I don't have my cell phone, so I can't do all these other things I do with it, whether that's pay for groceries or whatever else you do with your cell phone these days. But it's an interesting thought about whether you would need it, whether they would allow you to have a cell phone or whether it'd just be based on the transponder tagged to your car.
Interesting. Or if you accidentally left it on and like walked around your city and now you're
Yeah,
getting
right.
charged.
If you were, yeah, you could be congestion charged for being a pedestrian. I'm in a really
edge
dense
cases.
area. Walking around, or on a scooter, or even on a bike. Maybe you have to be going a certain miles per hour, and so you have to be on a bike or something. Maybe a shared bike, and you get congestion priced for being on a Bixie or something like that. It'd be really funny. Before they had actually the odd license plate schemes in Bogota, but they actually suspended that during the pandemic. So it's really interesting to think about, what that means for them now, instead of having these things that basically can be circumvented by a rich person having two cars with two license plates. Now they can, now they can do the pricing, which would be actually probably a better solution for them. And Bogota, I mean, they have, obviously they have a really good transit system, Transmilenio, the bus rapid transit system that's pretty famous around the world. And they have a lot of other things. They're starting to think about, I think they're starting to think about subways too. So there's lots of options for people to get around if they don't drive their cars. It's pretty interesting to think about whether like something like this could be happening in the US.
Yeah, I wonder how it would work. I mean, New York they said that they would have congestion pricing by now, and now it's not happening.
They're answering 400 questions about who's driving in from Philadelphia or whatever.
Exactly.
Stuff like that. It's pretty funny. Yeah. How they can't get it done even though they've wanted to. I think the governor kind of got some pushback after she made a comment during her I guess it was during a debate where she's like, it's not happening this year, and everybody's like, what? So crazy. Awesome. So let's go to the next one. Rethinking city sounds. What if we rethought sounds in busy cities? In Rotterdam, city officials believe that train bells and other noises are just background noise, but to many, it's an unbearable hum. Still, some are looking for ways to extract and enhance new sounds to create valuable urban experiences. This was by Lauren Kelly in Noema Magazine. This one was really cool. I like these types of articles where it kind of makes you think a little bit differently about the city than you might have thought about before. Obviously, we think about the city from an urban design standpoint, but we don't really usually think about it from the other senses, right? So urban design is like a visual sense. It's how you walk through the world. But then you have the soundscapes, you have touchscapes, or you have ways that you can, other than seeing, that affect how you go through the city. And I think these ideas are really something that we haven't explored as much maybe in urban planning that maybe we should.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has a quote. There's a quote somewhere that says, I'll be the first to admit that sound is not a sexy part of planning. And I would like to disagree. I think, I come from it as, living in San Francisco, obviously I'm surrounded by sound, but as someone who, I like birds. I'm not an actual bird watcher, even an amateur bird watcher, but being aware of bird calls, and being able to like move through the city and be like, oh yeah, there's red-tailed hawks somewhere over there, I think maybe has given me more appreciation, or at least awareness, for the like diverse amount of sounds in a city. And I think, from a musical standpoint, knowing some tracks that like sample, what is it called? The waiting signal sounds for pedestrian lights. I think there's definitely creativity beyond the city planning sphere that people have been able to tap into that has to do with urban sound. Also, as someone who's made videos for fun and for class, I think that's another element where you're thinking about like the sound of footsteps and textures that you're traversing on as you walk across the city, or the sound of cars. Or I think for one of the videos for a class project, I was looking at two sides of Franklin Park in Massachusetts, and the path of getting into the park from one side was very loud, cars honking, not that many pedestrian walkways, and the access point from the west side of the park, which was a more affluent neighborhood, was very peaceful and calm, and like lots of nice pedestrian paths. And just having people focus on sound for that video, I think was a very different experience for a lot of people. You're like, I understand that this route throughout the city, or this particular location is stressful to me in some way, like this article is saying. But until you really think about what is making the sounds, maybe then those planning decisions might not change if you're not aware of the impact.
I like their ideas of in Rotterdam specifically, this company Soundtrack City, them trying to like create a soundscape that was more pleasant, and pleasant is obviously subjective to a certain extent, because what some people find pleasant, others might not, because of just humans have different reactions to different sounds and things like that. But I've really found it interesting where they would try to like soften the noise of the vehicles. They would try to reduce the screeches from the trains that went through the area, to try to create a different level of sound for what they were trying to achieve, and kind of introduce people to other sounds that maybe they hadn't heard, or that were already going on, but they hadn't heard them before. It's kind of there was an interesting quote in here where he said, "There's so much noise around us that our brains have developed to select only the most critical sounds, though ambient, non-selected noise can also have a substantial effect on our health and well-being." Basically, I mean, we all have kind of this ability to block out all of these things that are happening and focus on certain, sounds. And it's really interesting to think about how many sounds are actually out there in the world that are actually happening around us that we don't really notice, because we're just kind of like, we're going through life, we're trying to block it out. It's like if you had memory about every single second of every single day, and you couldn't just you block out, kind of selectively, your brain had to go back through all those things. Oh, this is one of my favorite podcast episodes, but I think it was, what's the name of that podcast with Jad Abumrad and, oh gosh, people are going to be yelling at their phones. But anyways,
I'm the wrong person to ask about podcasts. I walk through the city in silence.
It's a really good one. Anyways, they talked about this guy named Mr. S. And Mr. S was, I think he was in Russia or something like that. But basically, every time he saw something, or every time something happened, he would remember every other instance of that happening. And so it was like this cascading thing. But he, early on, he had this amazing memory. And so he would do these tests where he would go into an auditorium and tell everybody in the room to like yell at him something, and then he could like say it back, half an hour of saying back everything everybody said. But then all that stuff got stuck in his brain, right? So every time he saw a cat, he remembers every single cat he's ever seen, that type of thing, kind of weird, in a weird way. Radio Lab, that's the name of the podcast, by the way. And so I think about it that way, is like, if our brains weren't able to kind of cut out that extra noise of every single cat that we've ever seen when we see a cat, in the same way with noises, if we weren't able to do that, I think we'd go a little bit insane because of the way that it impacts us. But I think it's really fascinating that there are so many noises and sounds that we hear every day, and we go through life hearing, that we kind of push out. We had a clock. My parents still have a clock in the house that was kind of loud, but eventually you just kind of tuned it out when you lived there. But if you stayed over and you like slept in the guest room, or if you were on the couch or something, it was like this incessant clock sound, right? That you were like, well, what this loud noise going on? But we didn't hear it because we weren't, because we were so used to it. So it's like what you block out is so interesting and specific. But my question to you as an artistic person, how would you like think about designing a soundscape for a city? Like, what would you focus on if you were thinking about putting something together that like reflected what you think a city should actually sound like, instead of just like cars and like the din of the urban landscape?
Well, I think I would start by what you were saying about like being able to filter out certain sounds. I want to point out also, when you're in a place that's like acoustically off-putting to you, we also do notice that. It's like kind of the opposite, where we're unable to kind of enjoy the rest of our experience due to, I don't know if this has happened to you, but like some spaces feel like emptier than they are, or like more hollow, and that lends a coldness that maybe people might attribute to, like, oh, this place feels very sterile, and I can't put my finger on why. I think the lack of sound, I think, is also something that throws people off, because of the fact that so much sound is around us normally. I think people get kind of people can be kind of unsettled when they're in the countryside or they're in a forest and they're not hearing like electrical hums. So I think back to what you were saying and the article was saying about how subjective it is, like some sounds are pleasant to some people, some aren't to others. I think it'd be very hard to design a space, I mean, in general, not just, by sound, to design a place that is pleasing to everybody. But I think the presence of sound, the presence of conversation that you can like see, again, this is subjective. This is things that I like about a city, like being able to overhear conversations in a coffee shop or in a bar that, you can't really tell exactly what people are talking about, but you know that people are there and this is a place that people like to gather. I do think that in a city, we are used to the sound of cars going by as much as we might wish that we weren't. I think a good amount of sound can also lend a sense of safety to people. I know personally, as a woman walking through a space at night, I tend to steer towards louder areas. There's, the eyes on the street. I think the same can be said for, I guess, ears on a street or voices on a street. Where there's sound means there's activity. And I think our brains at this point are trained to associate that with, this is human life. Humans are gathering. This is a safe space to dwell in.
What I think is really interesting too is that I got from, I just thought of while you were talking was, I've heard of people before growing up in a city environment like New York City, and they go to a small college or they go to a place that's relatively quiet and they don't understand why it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't. It's something's wrong with the place for them. For one reason or another. Whereas somebody who grew up in that quiet environment, they go to a place like New York City, and that's not right for them either. It's like what you're used to when you're growing up and you're forming your life opinions about whatever it is, sound, touch, feel, those types of things. And then if you're kind of out of that environment, you get a little squishy because you just don't realize why. And ultimately, it might just be because you grew up in this space and this is what you're used to being around, and being put in that new environment is a little bit taxing on your system because your body is you've developed this system for coping with that whatever is going on in the place where you grew up, whereas you get put in this new place and your body has to readjust in some form or fashion, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have, I don't know if it'd be a park or some sort of space in a city where people who, like you said, like are maybe missing a quieter kind of environment that they grew up in can just sit in. Like I know there are parts of parks that I've been in that do feel that way to me, that you're like, oh, I could see skyscrapers, but I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing the city. And I don't know exactly how you design for it. Maybe just like, softer textures, or like a space on the other side of the park that's like, hey, you want the sounds of a city to be amplified? Like, you love this stuff? All right, come sit here. Like, you want a place to read that isn't next to a highway, but you want to hear the cars pass by. I think that would be pretty fun to play around with.
Yeah, there's so many things you could do with, like, the sounds and smells and touch and all these other things that aren't our visual aesthetic, visual, connectivity. It'd be interesting to try that with all different senses, because we have 5 of them. Some people might forget that sometimes, and we are able-bodied people that have all the senses too. There's some people that don't have those as well. So there's probably something to be said for planning for folks that don't have sight, that don't have hearing, that are impaired in some form or fashion. So
yeah, this article actually made me kind of branch out. I started reading about people who are blind and living in highly urbanized areas and different sort of audio cues that people use to navigate space. And I think there's a couple of companies trying to do like 3D audio to try to like help people navigate a space, like sounds coming from, like letting you know how to stay on track. But it's just so hard because like the second you get any sort of error, then you no longer, it's very easy to lose trust in some of these softwares or technologies. But I'd be interested in understanding, technology aside, like how sound currently in a city, in cities that are, often not planned with people who are visually impaired in mind, like currently how does the sound affect people not trying to navigate?
Yeah. Also, for some more reading, if folks are interested, there was also another piece that was in the newsletter the last couple of weeks from the MIT Technology Review, written by Jennifer Haddam, that was talking about the sounds and smells of cities. So it's kind of related, and actually had Daniel Kirsia was actually quoted in both articles, which we actually had Daniel on a number of years ago. When I went to England to visit one of my friends, I actually went up to Nokia Labs in Cambridge and had a chat with him. So that was pretty cool as well. So go back, way back in time in the podcast. I can't remember what episode it was, but maybe in the first 100 or so episodes, there's some really interesting things about places, smells and sound maps and those types of things. So pretty cool. Some other links that we have.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. I took a class with Dr. Abby Spinak at GSD this semester called Experimental Infrastructures. And I think one of the very first exercises she had us did was make a sensory map. And some people did go with sound as they walked around their neighborhoods. That was just a nice lead into a course that was all about like trying to see the city, and not just the city, but spaces in a different way, and what could be defined as infrastructure. So the infrastructure of sound, maybe.
That's right. Infrastructure of everything. All right. What ban cars really means. Doug Gordon, host of the War on Cars podcast, writes about the phrase ban cars and what it means to him. Ultimately, it's not about wiping cars off the face of the earth, but reckoning with the negative impacts of the automobile on society and expanding the rights of people who don't drive. So Doug Gordon and Jalopnik. So I do like the nuanced discussion of the piece, but I worry a lot of times that the nuance gets lost outside of the urban and transportation planning circle. And as someone myself who doesn't own a car and is frustrated constantly by the speed of change that comes with active transportation, as we can't get stuff going fast enough, and worries about road safety, it speaks specifically to my anger at what's not happening, and also kind of the negative impacts of vehicles in society. But I also admit freely that anger is also a path to the dark side, and so I think I don't know if there's probably something to be said about the wonderful nuance that Doug wrote about, but also how it's perceived when you say ban cars to a group of people who have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I unfortunately also fall in the category of people who I'm surrounded by a lot of people who do know what I'm talking about when I say ban cars. So I don't get as much exposure to, maybe people who might be like, why would you say that? Please explain the nuance. And then I'm forced to think about the nuance. But I do think moving to Cambridge from the Bay Area, where a lot of the people who I went to college with who stayed around did not go on to own cars and do mostly walk or take public transit, to an area where people are coming from states in the Midwest or the South, and they might have brought their car with them, and they are in, urban planning or landscape architecture, and do believe that this sort of car culture is taxing on our society. But because of the environment in which they're raised and the lifestyles that they live, can offer some more like living nuance. And that was interesting to me to also interact with. Like normally I'm in circles where we're like, yeah, ban cars, and no one owns a car. And so it's very easy to say. But when you're with people who are like, yeah, ban cars, I do have a car, but this is why I believe. And then you're like, okay, yeah, like this is, you're confronted with the nuance that, like you said, doesn't always come across on like urbanist Twitter.
That place, yes. Yeah, no, I mean, as somebody who grew up in Texas, and in a suburb with a car, on my 16th birthday, my dad let me drive his car, and it gave you a lot of freedom, because even though where I grew up, there was a lot of bike trails and things like that, and hopefully I'll have an episode on that sometime soon. I'm starting to gather some evidence for it, but it's interesting to go from a place like that to go to school in Austin and live near campus, and I still had a car, but most of the time I was walking or taking the bus, the number one bus to campus to go to school. And then till moving to the Bay Area, where I eventually, because of I didn't want to pay any more DPT parking tickets, like I sold my car, and now I just now we live car free, and it's such a kind of a difference in places that you can kind of see all of the different ecosystems in which cars can exist and should exist, and all the ecosystems where they should be limited to a certain extent. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where you're going to get rid of cars altogether just because of the way our built environment is built up. But there should be, like Doug says, a place where we have bike lanes, we have bus lanes, we have places where the car is not the first thought of transportation planning. It's actually put on the back burner because there are just more people in an area than can support 250 square feet of car versus fitting 15, 20 people in that same 250 square feet. So it's a difference in mindset, and it's just an interesting discussion to have. And I was interested to read some of the comments. I don't usually read the comments in articles, but I did read the comments in this one to see what people were responding like. And a lot of people, agreed. And maybe that's because, there are folks that like Doug and he posted the article, and maybe they went on afterwards and they listened to the War on Cars or something along those lines. But I feel like there was a lot of people in there also. They were like, I own 6 cars, but I agree with you. The nuance is such that, if you're in a big city and you can ride a bike or take the bus, then that's great. And I would rather actually not have to drive 45 minutes to my job every day, but it's just not the reality for me. So I found some of the comments in there enlightening, because generally I thought it would be like, go home, loser, get out of here, but it wasn't like that at all. And also, one of the things that struck out to me over the last couple of days too is this is a very political fight, and I wish it wasn't, because I think, safety on the roads and transportation shouldn't be as political as it is. But I guess eventually it does, as Doug mentions, it gets there. And, yesterday I found an article about how the Texas GOP has on their party platform that they want to get rid of road diets. And I was like, what's that doing in a party platform for a political party? Apparently it's because a lot of cities are starting to create an area of the city, or they're creating a part of their transportation system that's catered towards people that don't own cars. And the people that live outside of cities are upset that they can't go and drive maybe as fast as they used to through a city to get to where they wanted to go. And so they want to, put it in a political platform. And I thought I feel like it's super crazy to me that it's gotten this far, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, not to get political, but because it's already political, what is that quote about, like, when you're on, like, the side of the majority or the oppressor, quote unquote, like, equality looks like oppression from the other point of view. And it's like, oh, they're taking away our car spaces, and not realizing that the car spaces have been kind of the norm for so long. I guess maybe it's less of like banned cars. It's like a banned car culture type of situation. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, what is the phrasing? What's the George Lakoff linguistics special that allows you to kind of allow people to understand what you're saying without making them super upset by your comment of banned cars, right? Like, I don't know if it's actually possible.
I mean, they're saying, it's bad PR because then you have people who think that your movement is doing this very extreme thing that you're not actually doing. But, like, on the other hand, maybe in the long run, like, it's good PR in the sense that you've caught people's attention, and now you can be like, okay, maybe we don't want to ban cars, but have you considered temporarily removing cars on weekends from this street? And they're like, oh, that's so much better and less scary, and not realizing that you're still, like, pushing. Obviously, that's not very, very, it's not very progressive, but you're kind of incrementally pushing people towards the direction by scaring them with this stance, and maybe they'll accept a little
And
a little more
politics is
change.
interesting in that it's so full of phrases and positions that are far on one side or far on the other side, and that's kind of how the center fights back against certain politics as well. So, if you propose something like, so if you're negotiating, right, and you really want to get to $50,000 for a job or whatever, you don't start out at $50,000. You start out at like, oh, I want 75, and they're like, well, what if I gave you 50? And you're like, all right, because and then you get what you want, right? And so I feel like that's the same with like some of these political positions as well, where it's like, okay, let's ban cars. And people are like, okay, well, what if we kind of sort of like halfway ban cars? And you're like, okay, I'll take it, because,
Right.
you're not going to get there otherwise. So I feel like there's value also in, taking an extreme position to get to a kind of a more middle ground, rather than taking the middle ground and getting to less of what you really wanted.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think also additionally, maybe just by saying it, you're also introducing, just trying to like throw the idea out there, basically, right? And what you end up is people who haven't heard the band cars take with all this nuance before hearing it. And, like we've said, like, oh, that's crazy. But you also might end up with people being like, tell me more. Or I haven't considered the idea of a world without cars before. And again, like we've said, it's probably not going to happen. But what if we just considered it for a little bit, and maybe this is just a platform for people to do that upon? Like I think in the infrastructures course that I was talking about, we talked about like, what is the use of infrastructure as a word even? Because it's so hard to find a definition. Everyone has a different definition. Like, is there a right definition? Should we just not use the word? And I think my point was that it could be very useful as a jumping off point in public dialogue, in public discourse, because people have, maybe even because people have so many different preconceived ideas of what it means, it's a starting point, not like we're going to come to an agreement at the end of this conversation, but in order to center it upon something. Maybe that's where these like catchphrases that don't have the nuance that people would like them to have, maybe that is their use, I guess, in daily conversation or political discourse.
Yeah, I think you have a good point, and using infrastructure as kind of as its own infrastructure, as its own framing of maybe sides of an issue, because we did have this huge discussion about, during when the infrastructure bill was being under consideration and then the Build Back Better bill, which we may be getting taken back up again, but who knows what that actually is going to happen with that, with cinema and Manchin. But it's interesting to think about what the overall thoughts are on what's infrastructure. And so thinking about, well, lead pipes, that's infrastructure because it's infrastructure, water infrastructure. There's roads. I mean, a lot of folks thought that roads are the only thing that counts as infrastructure, but then you have care infrastructure. I mean, that's something that I think that's outside of the regular norm. But if you think about infrastructure as something that holds up society, that's actually something that you can fit under that umbrella once you describe what your framework is for the infrastructure. So it's a good kind of binding agent, I guess, as it were, to talk about some of these issues like care and others that might not fit under the usual roads and bridges type of infrastructure that we talked about before, even pipes and internet for
Right.
lack of a better term. So
Yeah. And not to like, again, use that stereotypical, infrastructure is just roads, but thinking of infrastructure as a vehicle, or the metaphors that relate to infrastructure in our language are also very interesting to think about. Like when we talk about things being a vehicle for something, like we're
oh
almost
yeah, or
kind of like
platforms.
right, like inherently kind of like instilling this like, or confirming the role that roads and vehicles play in our
Yeah.
society.
I feel like technology dives into that too a lot, or like, the kind of the tech discussion generally, where that they have a word for something and then it kind of stacks up on top, and it gets real weird from there. But
Yeah, I mean, words are important. I
they
think
are
I think
important.
they're very, very important.
That's
And
why I think George Lakoff and those folks are really interesting people. I don't know if you're familiar with George's work, but
I have heard.
at Berkeley, but thinking about the framing of things, and one of my favorite things of his, and I think I posted this on Twitter the other day, but the Commonwealth for the common good, and thinking about how we can come together to do things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do on our own. and why government is a good structure for that when it's done right. So you have anti-government, you have pro-government people, and so you can have this discussion about it and use words to actually kind of convey what you actually mean when you're talking about government. And a lot of people have bad conceptions, but when you talk about it in a certain way, like the Commonwealth for the common good, then you can start to kind of talk about it in a better way. So that's just a little George Lakoff. Don't think of an elephant.
Yep.
That's his big thing. Cool. Well, I like the article. I think I really appreciated Doug's kind of side of it and his nuance in the article. I just wish that maybe there was maybe the nuance was already packed into the phrase, but I fear that that's probably not the case. And I think with any discussion, that's probably not the case at either, any political discussion you end up having. It's really hard to have that nuanced conversation unless you really have that trust with somebody to have that conversation without getting, angry about it. So I think that you have to have a starting point. And I think you're right about the word infrastructure and having a place to start. And that's really a good part of it.
And also something that can fit on a protest poster board.
That's right. Exactly. Well, what he said is ban cars under specific circumstances and situations is a bit cumbersome for a hashtag.
That too.
All right. Last one. It's been a bit over a month since Germany announced its discount €9 summer pass, and it's interesting to take a look at the results thus far. One of the good things is that it's increased ridership and gotten a lot more people on the trains. Negatively, those increased passenger numbers, 25% in some cities, leave no room for bikes, and the last-minute announcements of the scheme gave agencies little time to ramp up service or get additional equipment. Officials representing the Association of Transit Agencies in the country were a bit salty about the whole thing, given the preparation, but it seems like 21 million tickets sold is a positive outcome. So basically, Germany did this thing where they're like, okay, well, we're having this war in Ukraine. Russia's cutting off our gas. We're not paying them in rubles, that type of stuff. And so they're having to cut to get more people on transit, get more people to kind of move around in a different way. And with the energy crisis going on. And so, they're like, okay, well, let's have €9 summer tickets. And, they didn't tell any of the agencies that they were going to do this. And they spend a bunch of money, and it seems to be really, working out well. But then the folks at the agencies or the associations that represent the agencies aren't super happy about it. But maybe next time they'll learn something from it. Interesting to think about. What do you think about this piece?
Yeah, I agree in that it's almost like a store doing like a surprise sale of its inventory. And I think it's public transportation is obviously suffering from lack of marketing and PR to try to get people to realize that, like this compared to your car, this is a good and fun and oftentimes better alternative. So I feel like from a marketing standpoint, this is like a fun thing that transit systems can do. And I would, as someone in San Francisco, if they did something like that, I would hop on it. But I think the more important point is that if you're doing this without providing the necessary additional infrastructure to back it up, I think, you're going to run into quite a few issues like they did here. You want enough people to be staffing things, and you don't want to work your drivers to death. And so I think it's a good idea in theory. And maybe it took this sort of like guerrilla tactical urbanist adjacent way to be like, see, look, it works. Ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But moving forward, if they do it again, it'd be interesting to see whether it could be even more streamlined if everybody was on the same page and there were more buses and it was like one unified, which is cool.
Well, I know that a lot of agencies here in the U.S. would kill for 25% increase in ridership. So let's do it. €9. I'll go exchange money for €9 to pay if I can pay a €9 Muni Pass or something. Maybe make it a different currency or something. I don't know.
Right.
But
and asking like how many different transit agencies do we have in the Bay Area? Asking all of them to organize and
29.
Is already difficult enough. So I don't know how well they'd be able to manage this, but maybe it could be.
Well, when Ian and Seamless Bay Area are done with their great work, then we'll have it all sorted out and we can have a super transit pass. I would like this for San Francisco. I'd like a summer pass to get around, just to hop on, hop off kind of situation where you can go anywhere, and you know, it's not like it's hard to flash your clip a card and pay $2.50 and $3 for your fare, but just, you know, it'd be just easy just to not even worry about it. Just be like, okay, I can get anywhere in the city I want to and not worry about whether my phone's working or whether I have my card, or, you know, I can just go, and it would be really good. I might take it down 24th Street from one side to the other. I don't know, just to, you know, avoid walking sometime, but that's just me, and neither here nor there.
I mean, especially in like an area that gets so much tourist traffic in the summer, if those two things were kind of interlinked in whatever promotional material they decided to have for it.
I mean, I feel like they already do that to a certain extent sometimes for F line anyways, like going between the ferry building and Fisherman's Wharf. Like there's a lot of times where the drivers are just like, whatever. It's like there's so many people hopping on it, and they don't know what they're doing because a lot of them are tourists, so they're just like, whatever. So it feels like the same way anyways. So and maybe the cable cars too sometimes, where I've known situations where, you know, you flash them your Clipper card and they're like, yeah, whatever, you're local, it's cool. Don't worry about paying the $5, you know, $7 or whatever it is now. And that's frustrating from a revenue standpoint. We want to pay for stuff, but at the same time, it's like, they're just like, okay, we got so much to do. Why do we have to worry about collecting money for tickets? So. All right. Well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it. So thank you. Thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month and we'll get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month and you'll get the bus only scarf. I now have pre-order forms up for the bus only and bike only scarves. I've ordered the scarves, but it takes a little while to get them into production. So I'm going to have two kinds of the bike scarf. It's going to be a lightweight version and a knit version for the bike scarf, and then we'll have the bus only scarf as we've had before. Check out theoverheadwire.com and click on the scarf page at the top of the site. The designs are up there as well, so people can check that out and get one if you get a chance. But if you want one of our bus only scarves right away, you can do so by become a $10 a month Patreon supporter. I've sent out a few in the last month, so I appreciate folks that are ordering them. Thanks again for supporting the show on Patreon, you guys. It's really appreciated. Super appreciative of you guys, you know, helping us get the shows out. And I know Sophia appreciates it too, because that's how I pay you to edit the podcasts, is with the Patreon money. So we appreciate that. You know, appreciate you editing the Talking Headways episodes. It's super awesome. Yeah. So get the scarves. Whenever you get a chance, Sophia, I'd love to hear your opinions on what the scarves look like. Yes. We designed the green ones to get some fresh Kermit for the bike only scarves, and I took a while to design these because there was one that was a checkerboard that I couldn't do it in the knit scarf type because it was so kind of not intricate, but it was like the colors faded because the checkerboard fades. And so I had to do it in that specific lightweight scarf. But actually that's good because I've had a lot of people in Phoenix and others, I'm looking at you, Ryan and Tracy, that have been like, I can't wear this scarf in the summertime in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm like, okay, well, let's get something a little lighter. I know that they have some other suggestions, but I think this will be good. So hopefully folks enjoy it.
I've been waiting for the bus only ones to come back. I really want one.
Yeah.
I want to, as a soccer fan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you are a soccer fan. You're a big fan.
I've been mostly watching Premier League, so football, I suppose.
Yeah. I know that the women's Euros are on right now. In the mornings. So that's been pretty cool. I've watched a couple of those. But I'm looking forward to the World Cup this year and the women's next year. It's going to be awesome. Just 2 years of World Cup right away. It's so the best years are the World Cup years. All right. Well, puppies and go ahead.
Oh, no, I was right on cue. I was just going to ask if we were going to do.
Yeah. Listener questions and comments first, actually, before we get to the puppies and butterflies. If you have a question or comment, feel free to tweet at us, a comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I love your comments and your questions, and we try to answer them as best as possible. Generally, I'll send you an email back right away, but then we'll talk about it on the show the next time hopefully if it's in a timely fashion. So we're good. Puppies and butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. Okay, so I imagine that you have a puppies and butterflies.
Sort of. I have. I'm just thinking of not a puppies or butterflies at all, but just annoyance at the fact that the car-free JFK
Yes.
yes is once again going through a whole. I thought we had that settled and it was wonderful, and now it's. I think I didn't check. I think they had enough signatures for it to be on the ballot in November or something like that. So it's going to come down to a vote.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Well, first off, I'm tired of voting. I mean, this is an even year with the senators and stuff on the ballot and whatnot, so that's fine. But I'm tired of voting off the major ballot years and out of November. If it's going to be on the ballot, we want it to be on the ballot, in a regular time frame. That being said, we voted that we were going to make JFK car free. It's like one car free street in the city. I'm really angry with the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, FAMPS,
Yep.
which includes the De Young. I was a member and now I'm not. Every time they ask me for money, I write a note back saying I'm not going to support you until you stop arguing that your parking garage is not good enough. They're really frustrating in that they just can't seem to get out of their own heads that this is actually a good decision. And nobody needs to drive down JFK, honestly. And you can get to the
Yeah.
museums by going to that parking garage, or you can come from the other side, from 9th and Irving side. So I don't know what their deal is. It is frustrating. I am upset about it. I do write them mean emails. Okay, well, they're not mean. They're just like, hey, I'm not going to support this, but stop sending me emails if you don't want responses, basically, kind of thing. And I do use stamps to send them their mail back because
Oh,
I'm like,
delightful.
you have to get through to them somehow and let them know that you're very upset. And so I wonder, it's interesting because I know that there's a lot of people online that I follow who used to be members of the Fine Arts Museums that actually have stopped being a member because of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, they're like complaining about, oh, we don't have the same membership levels. I'm wondering how many of the people that canceled are like, well, this is the reason why you don't have the membership level, or people aren't coming to visit the museum, not because you didn't have a handicap parking space, which you actually have in the garage underneath
Your brand new parking garage.
in your brand new parking garage and center. So that's accessible from Lincoln. So,
that
yes.
you could lower the prices of if you really wanted
if you wanted to get, right, exactly.
if it was really about equity.
I know. Yeah. Well, so I guess that's a Puppies and Butterflies, because it was a Puppies and Butterflies that we actually got it to.
Yeah. I bike. I
car free
mean,
there.
my mother does a whole loop down the Great Highway, whole nother thing, but down the Great Highway and through JFK.
Well, isn't that included too?
back
The
up.
Great Highway, JFK, in this
Yeah.
ballot measure that they want to do?
Yeah, I personally am a little more understanding of the arguments against the Great Highway, that being such a major thoroughfare, and if they're going to keep it closed on weekends, and that's great. But I think
the ocean's going to take it anyway.
I know.
The sand's on there all the time.
But I mean, for JFK, especially with there being so many different routes, and there also is a historical foundation for it being closed. I biked there every weekend as a kid, and now that I'm home, I'm biking along JFK, and it's so nice to see people enjoying it. And so it'd be really nice if that continued to be a thing. Yeah,
let's let that stick.
The actual Puppies and Butterflies
Okay.
would be the Open Streets program in Boston that did their first. So Mayor Wu, and I think her streets coordinator, a bunch of people, they've been having a plan to bring back their open streets, and they have, I think, throughout the summer, 4 different planned events in various areas of Boston where they're closing down the street and doing a whole big block party-esque. And they just had their first one down in Jamaica Plains on Sunday, and apparently went really well based on what I saw on Twitter.
Yep. I saw that too.
And they were working with some local consulting businesses to kind of plan the events well, people who had lived in the neighborhood and grown up in the neighborhood. So I hope that I hope they continue to do well. I think there's another one in July and then going on into September. But most of the feedback I saw was you should make this a monthly thing. And then her responding, it is a monthly thing. So that was exciting to see.
Let's do all the streets all the time.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what they're kind of inching towards.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my puppies and butterflies is today. NASA released an image of the historic universe from its James Webb Infrared Telescope, and man, is it cool! It's not CGI Marvel movie universe. It's real life, colorful, beautiful universe of galaxies. It's really cool. I don't know if you've seen this yet, but it's pretty cool. I mean, you know me and wanting to go to cities around Earth and live for 1,000,000 years so that I can live in every one. Well, this makes my brain explode a little bit because I'm like, well, like, what if I could live in every galaxy? It'd be great. But it's cool to see that. I'm, as a space fan, generally, it's really cool that they were able to put together that picture. And it's just so amazing because it's like when you look up at this picture that you see, and I'm sure, if you go on Twitter, you'll see it because everybody's posting it. But, it's basically when we look up at the sky, it's like this speck of sand size of the sky that we see from Earth, right? And so it just blows your mind about thinking about how many galaxies are out there in every direction. If this is what you see in that one little speck, one little grain of dust, this is how the universe looks. So the cool part is that, this is the universe millions of years ago because light travels so slowly. So, this is what it looked like so long ago, centuries, millennia ago. And so we're kind of getting this is our time travel. It's just light, but it's cool.
Yeah, no, I love it, but also it scares me.
It scares you. Why does it scare you?
Oh, I don't know. Like thinking about how this was million years ago, and like in all the time that has passed, like what, like if my brain starts going into like if the universe is like shrinking, and what if all these stars have like disappeared in the time that we've like that has passed since the image and us. And I think I'm one of those people where like I love constellations and I love the night sky, but I get a little overwhelmed when it's too clear and I can't spot like my comfort constellations. Like, oh, I'm too small, like bring me back. Like I need to be able to see like Orion and like the Big Dipper and I'm good. And when there's too many, I tend to like, I think I freeze. It's a little much to think about how small we are, how big the universe is, and how many places on Earth that I still have yet to like. I think about like San Francisco and I'm like, there's still so much I want to do in this city. And then to like comprehend the universe is just beyond my little pedestrian brain.
I hear you. But it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, Sophia, where can folks find you online if you wish to be found?
Oh, I am not online.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sorry to disappoint. No. I have an Instagram for my film photography, but other than that, I kind of just hop around and
just disappeared into the universe.
Yeah, into this James Webb Space Telescope image.
Yep, exactly. You're somewhere in there. That's great.
Yeah, but I guess if people want to find me on Instagram and take photos of landscapes and cityscapes, I'm at Speak Softly. So Speak SOPHLI.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us on Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thank you, Sophia, for coming on the show. And
delighted.
We'll have you back again soon. We'll see everybody next time.
Bye.
Talking